the Requiem Metal Podcast, episode 76, Terrorizer World Downfall. You just heard Storm of Stress and Afterworld Obliteration by the mighty Terrorizer on the Requiem Metal Podcast. I'm Mark.
And I'm Jason. And we decided to tackle yet another of our, slowly evolving, personal Hall of Fame records. This is a record you'll never see in say for instance like Decibel, because of Jesse Pintado
his unfortunate passing
passed away
a couple years ago.
And it probably should. I think when they did that grindcore ranking a couple years like last year, this was number 2.
Yeah,
after Repulsion
for good reason.
So, and this is probably of the, I don't know, I guess you could say the second generation of grind. I would consider like Repulsion and Scum to be like sort of their own little thing, and then this is sort of the beginning of the second wave of grind, where
and this is stuff
you can add catchiness and different things to it. That's just
if you take away the double bass, take away the kind of more death metal bass vocals, and for my ear, the entire thing sounds like it's David Vincent singing.
Yeah. Well, especially, and he did. We'll come back to the first 2 songs, but he did sing in the opening track for sure.
Yeah, but then you hear that, and then just hearing so many Morbid Angel records, I totally hear him. Maybe
Oscar Garcia just sounds a lot like Dave Vincent. So
could be. I don't think I've ever heard him on anything else. But yeah, I mean, the whole Terrorizer project was kind of bizarre. I mean, the whole way this thing got produced was after the band broke up, and Shane Embury from Napalm Death was a huge fan of the demos and conned Digby Pearson, the runner of Earache at the time, conned him into getting the record done. And apparently, this is the first Scott Burns metal production, isn't it?
I don't know if it's the first. It's one of the first, though.
It's one of the real early ones.
Well, did Burns do Altars?
I don't remember. I'd have to.
I gotta believe he did, but it was like part of the whole pantheon. One
of the things, I think, one of the sound that got him.
Yeah, I mean, this is probably the first great thing I think he did in terms of like where people are like, oh, the production, this sounds great,
And it's definitely got the punk aesthetic.
Oh, it sounds like a punk record
through the entire thing. I mean, going right down to the lyrics to everything basically. But apparently a lot of the songs are actually pulled over from Nausea, Oscar Garcia's band that I think formed as Terrorizer was kind of on its way out.
Yeah, and I think the other guy that was in Nausea was the bass player who was in prison when they went to actually record World Downfall, and so that's why Dave Vincent jumped in to play bass. And I can't remember his name right offhand. He was another Latino guy from the Southern California.
Garvey.
Okay, yeah, and I have his first name written down somewhere in some of the notes that I was looking at, but
at this point, Sandoval was working on Morbid Angel's Altars of Madness as well.
Yeah,
so you can definitely see a marked improvement in his dexterity on the kit. But also, I don't know Vincent is credited with co-producing this as well.
Yeah, he produced it and Burns engineered it. So.
Okay, so I don't know who's, definitely to give the credit to on the sound of it, but they managed to capture everything pretty well, but not to the point of what would later be death metal production standards. But I mean, something that really gets you excited is the way that the hi-hats are produced.
I could listen to like the drum, like loops of the drums in this whole record, like over and over again. I mean, there's specific moments like on the title track, which was the last song we'll be playing tonight, but there's these sort of like choice moments, like when we get to Enslaved by Propaganda, it's just like there's like this surgical like nature of like attack that happens.
And then like there's all the stuff that's going on the kit itself, but in the drums there's this weird jazz swing where he's playing open hi-hats, so they're just kind of slide down.
It totally swing,
but they sound kind of tinny, and it's definitely got almost like a demo quality to it, but like in a really good way.
They're imperfect, and that's what I love about them. And then like on Storm of Stress, which you just heard, there's also that sort of signature early Pete Sandoval like Altars of Madness chaos, where it's just like, I mean, he's beat like on Covenant and even Blessed Are the Sick, the chaos seems like almost controlled in a way, like almost like I mentioned before, like a beat down, like you're just like getting like the most violent massage ever, because there's like a rhythmic like nature to like his punching with the drums, whereas on like Altars and like Terrorizer World Downfall, it's
he's like
unpredictable. Yeah, like you don't know where the punches are gonna. It's like a drunken fighting or something.
I wonder how much that has to do. Supposedly the record was recorded and mixed in
like
8 hours.
8 hours, yeah. So and I mean, and again, going back to the punk aesthetic, they totally took that punk approach to this. Like, let's just like play and see what happens. So again, the band in case we've sort of confused you with about 15 different references to different members. The band that you're going to hear on World Downfall, and this record was recorded, I do believe, like November 1989 or somewhere in 1989. The band was formed in 87. They're from the Los Angeles kind of area. But the people you're hearing primarily is Oscar Garcia on vocals, who was in Nausea. He's
also Majesty before that.
Oh, okay. Jesse Pintado on guitar. He's playing all the guitar parts, who, of course, after this record will go on and play on Harmony Corruption and future Napalm Death records until he passes. Dave Vincent, of course, from Morbid Angel, doing the bass and then some vocals on the record. And then, of course,
Pete
Sandoval. Okay. Oh, and it was
Commando.
Alfred Estrada was the guy I was thinking of.
Earache Estrada's cousin.
Yeah, of course. And he was the one that was in prison, and that's why Dave Vincent...
Jail, I think. I don't know if he's actually in prison.
Yeah,
but
that's right. Prison, jail. There's a difference. Yeah, you're right.
He could just throw a brick through a window and not slit his throat.
Yeah, that's true. And so most of these songs were written prior to 89, correct?
Yeah, they're all from the 87, 88 demos.
Yeah. So,
and which is kind of, you think about
it's kind of like what happened with Repulsion. Right?
Exactly, yeah.
Where those songs were floating around for a couple of years and no one actually recorded them until Horrified was finally...
And it's kind of funny that how, like, the level of musicians that are on the record at this point. Because I'm sure Pete Sandoval will kind of cut his teeth on this stuff. But then working with Morbid on Altars and then coming back to do this, you've got to imagine his skills are up.
Isn't it? I think it's playing on Terrorizer that made Vincent sort of fly out from Florida to California to get Sandoval and basically kick Mike Browning out of Morbid Angel.
Which was the best thing they ever did.
Yeah, exactly. Mike Browning's not a very
And now we have Nocturnus to thank for that.
Well, you probably will never hear a Nocturnus show, so...
No,
I don't think I could talk Mark into that.
The crappiest songs of death metal, but... The worst use of keywords.
I don't think I could do I could do like 4 songs and call it good.
Yeah, I could maybe do 1.
So what we've decided to do is sort of approach the record and give you a few tidbits as well as we can about the record. But I think one of the beautiful things about World Downfall is the consistency of it, and so it's not going to be it's going to be more Rain and Blood than say like a Seasons of the Abyss, which has like every song's completely different on say Seasons, and where Rain and Blood is like a unified like assault, it's one sound, and there's like little tidbits and unique moments scattered throughout the record, so I don't want to take that away from it. And you heard them on the first couple tunes. After World Obliteration, the opening track there, that's really sort of the template song. You hear the odd drum production. Everything's off a little bit in it, but yet
I think it goes back to that
metal.
Punk aesthetic. Yeah.
And I mean, you'll even hear, we mentioned Repulsion, you're going to hear a little bit of that. You're going to hear Napalm Death scattered and sprinkled throughout. You're going to hear, the Discharge, Anacro, Punk kind of crust kind of sound, especially in this next set. There's really a trio, or really 4 songs that sort of have that kind of approach.
Well, something, when we unfortunately we went to Wendy's to try to refuel before this podcast. But yeah, you're saying that like Terrorizer is almost like this like Pig Destroyer almost is taking this kind of formula and condensing it down just to those catchy moments.
Sure. And like, Terrorizer really rolled it out as the beginning part. Scum is just like Scum and from Enslavement were they weren't Terrorizer, that's for sure. I mean, they're great records, but they're
a product of their time. This is showing like what the medium could be.
There was an extremity to those 2 first Napalms in terms of like almost like showing off the like just how extreme you could possibly be. Whereas with Terrorizer, there's I don't want to say a sense of fun to it, because they're not. I mean, they're talking about very serious matters politically and stuff. But I feel like there's like a more of a songwriting energy that sort of exists there, rather than like an artistic social experiment of music, which is what you hear on. I mean, Scum is such a kind of collage of different things happening. I mean, heck, there's completely different bands on each side of Scum. I mean, there's no cohesion there.
Yeah.
This is 8 hours in a room. Scum to me is like the development of like 4 or 5 years leading up to that moment.
Yeah, it's more of a historical document. This is more of a piece of music.
Sure.
And I think this World Downfall and then Disrupt Unrest, first Brutal Truth record. That's almost this kind of like this other tangent of
the
where
second
grind
wave, kind of in a sense. You know, I mean, if like Dark Throne could be considered like the beginning of the second wave of black metal, then I would say like Terrorizer is sort of the beginning of the second wave of sort of grindy.
Yeah, after Napalm, Carcass, Heresy, all that kind of stuff. So
Sure. You know, Storm of Stress, the second tune we played, it really kind of gives you an indication of when they want to sort of get outside the box of like the traditional approach to what you had heard of grindcore up to this point. You know, they start with sort of the bass intro a little bit, and then they go into sort of the blinding speed, and they do some stop-start. It's very catchy, you know.
I mean, the whole record is super catchy.
It's super catchy, yeah. I mean, even in its most blazing, like, you know, moments, I mean, it still comes back to that punk aesthetic, which is, you know, you're hooked onto the energy of the moment, you know, and you can really sort of go along with this record. And this record in particular, you said was tough to get back in the day.
It was on CD. I mean, sure, we could have got it on LP, but we had like a cassette tape of it because I know it kind of bubbled up. I mean, again, after, like Entombed and all that stuff was popping up on Earache, we'd go back and try to find anything with an Earache label on it, you know, like Lawnmower Death and just bizarre crap that they had laying around. So I remember always being a big fan of Fear of Napalm and Storm of Stress because they're like two of the kind of standout tracks as far as like...
And I was only familiar with those two songs through Vader's Future of the Past, which I talked about a couple episodes ago.
Yeah.
And I didn't hear the originals probably for 5 years. Probably not until 97 or 98.
Okay.
So, probably not 5 years, so probably like 3 or 4 years after Future of the Past.
And I think this...
Grindcore Kuhn got this.
Yeah.
And, I remember freshman year, he was at Michigan State, and I came down, and he's like, look what I picked up the other day. And I was like, oh, no.
This is pretty awesome.
Cool.
I don't know if this was Shane Embury being like forward-thinking, but it seems like he almost like harnessed what would become the new sound of Napalm, Harmony Corruption, onward. We even hear like elements that we hear later on, and
you hear late '90s Napalm.
Yeah, totally, like Inside the Torn Apart kind of weird, electro. I don't even know how the hell you talk about those riffs.
Well, when we get on like Dead Shall Rise, which is I think the song that you were like, oh man, this sounds like late '90s Napalm. You know? I mean, it's weird, and it's weird because Jesse Pintado didn't write a lot of Napalm songs, but yet like. Maybe Embury knew how to harness the energy that he had on like Terrorizer in the same kind of like,
because you look
punky
at
approach he took.
They had Righteous Pigs and Terrorizer, which basically kind of formed the guitar section of Napalm for 10 years.
Was Righteous Pigs from LA too?
They're from Las Vegas.
Okay, so West Coast kind of.
West Coast-ish. Yeah, I don't really know what the culture of Las Vegas is. It seems to be devoid of fun.
I think
if you know about it, let me know.
Yeah. But, for sure. I mean, and those two guys, those two Americans, obviously will join after.
And this is, I think, where after Terrorizer, where Pintado joins Napalm, that's where Napalm actually ups their ante for musicianship outside. I mean, we got Mick Harris on drums, who's never been a technical player, but he's just all about power and, fury, I guess, more than anything. Like, how fast can he possibly play?
Was that the last... Harris record?
That was the last Harris record. I think there might have been which is all. He's also from Los Angeles area as well, which he's not. Sandoval's more of a he's just kind of an anomaly. There's not a whole lot of guys as good as him.
No.
Harris solid, but he doesn't have that kind of energy and drive that I heard in Harris or in Sandoval and on the Terrorizer records. But I think that's where we divert from more of the punk aesthetic of Napalm to more of the
death metal
grindcore side of Napalm, and not to turn this into a Napalm show.
And this is definitely but I mean, you when you talk about Terrorizer, you have to bring in bands like Morbid Angel and Napalm Death into the conversation because of the roots of who these guys in Terrorizer were and became. So I think there's a lot of interesting things happening on this. It's a grind record, it's a death metal record, it's a punk record. It's
a crossover record.
Yeah, it's
for lack of a better word.
There you go. And speaking of Napalm, I think it's time to get to.
I'm kind of scared of it, to tell you the truth.
I'm not a big fan of Napalm. I just showed actually a Vietnam documentary in my global awareness class called Hearts and Minds. And
thank you, Monsanto, for creating all this awful.
The end of the film is quite brutal. It shows the napalm attacks, and there's this little like baby. I mean, the kids are just like mortified. They've never seen anything like this. So, but fear of napalm, which I'm quite, as Mark and I both said, we're quite afraid. This is really. It's definitely the catchiest riff on the record, I'd say. It's like
the hit single of the record.
Yeah, I could listen to a loop of the opening, like 40 seconds of the song, or opening 30 seconds, like
just the bass and the little drums.
Yeah, I don't need like the fast breakdown where like the music stops and they just go into like the grind part. Like it's like Pig Destroyer. Just play me that like 20-second riff over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And of course it's has the famous bass intro and I don't know. You'll be playing this on repeat. And then we're going to go into what I consider sort of the 4 discharge, disrupt, crusty, kind of punky.
Anarcho-esque stuff.
Yeah. Starting with Human Prey, which definitely has like the discharge sound, kind of mixing with DRI, dealing with it, kind of like that, the sort of mix that... fine line between punk and metal that the DRI was sort of like navigating around then.
We've got a Nausea cover, or not cover, but
an original
pulled in and redone as a Terrorizer Corporation pull-in.
Yeah, which has a galloping sort of feel to it. And then Strategic Warheads, which probably in the midst of 1989, end of the Cold War, was
hot in everybody's mind.
Yeah, a very relevant song. And then another Nausea song, which we'll end with, which is Condemned System. And these last two, which are both like 1 minute and 20 seconds, I wrote, this is the note I wrote after.
Barn burner.
These are the barn burners. Man, there's just like this. They're just going right for it. So, but Fear of Napalm, I think you will enjoy, and I hope you enjoy the barn burners at the end as well.
If not, it's only a couple minutes.
Yeah, I was going to say,
we'll be right back.
The whole record's only like 34 minutes total, so
36:14 for those counting.
Enjoy Fear of Napalm.
We just heard Condemned System.
Strategic Warheads.
Corporate Pull-In.
Corporation Pull-In.
Corporate Pull-Out.
You don't want to pull into just anything. Let's pull into
Definitely
corporation.
Not Wendy's.
Yeah, and Human Prey.
And Fear of Napalm.
Which I'm still scared of.
Which everybody should be, because it melts your face off.
Yes, it does. Ever burning. You can make napalm out of orange juice. And
oh, that's good. That's something we should tell people to do.
But yeah, the last two there were, in particular, like I said, I call them barn burners, but just, fast, short, to the point, very punky,
but still
a lot of attitude.
Had a lot of catchy hooks to the entire thing. It's kind of retarded how catchy this entire record is, even the ones that are on the surface straight ahead songs. And
I can't say enough. I mean, we could talk endlessly about just how important the drums are to the drive of what is going on. I mean, it's the Sandoval is to Terrorizer, I think, what the riffs of Pig Destroyer are to to that band.
What Scott Hull is to that band.
Yeah, what Scott Hull is to that band, or with the weird abstract way that Bill Steer sort of approached riffing was to sort of Carcass. I mean,
Carcass in itself, I hear a lot of similarities as far as Ken Owens' approach, which was more, it wasn't so you listen to Skullman from Enslavement, there's not a whole lot of variation in the drums at all. It's just kind of blasting straight ahead, but you listen to the first couple of Carcass records, and there's almost hip hop beats, not per se, but something that's more akin to something like that than just straight ahead blasting.
Something that swings a little bit too. Like you said, and it's odd. You don't hear too many drummers that hold the attention of they're almost like the nucleus of the band. I mean, Dave Lombardo comes pretty close to some of the golden era of Slayer. I mean, even though King and Hanneman and the Dive Bomb leads and stuff are doing their thing, I mean, this record really is centered around his drumming. People don't talk about the inventive riffs of Jesse Pintado. I mean, that, not to say that they're not inventive, but they're sticking to a certain punk kind of grind aesthetic that was already there. They're super catchy and they're perfect. He's taking almost the best elements out of punk and grind and death metal and sort of just doing that. Yeah. But he's not inventing you know what I mean? He's not Jimi Hendrix, or he's not Scott Hull, for instance. I mean, he's not just doing memorable riff after memorable riff. And certainly Oscar Garcia, we can't even tell if he's Dave Vincent on half the songs. So the vocals aren't necessarily innovative. And so when it kind of comes down to it, Sandoval is sort of the heart and soul of this band. And I mean, everything he's doing in terms of the cymbal work, the drive, the stop starts.
I think a testament to his ability and his performance on the record. I think you could strip everything else away and it'd still be totally listenable if it was just his drum tracks.
I could just listen to the drums, And I mean, I think what's really good, and I remember, and this is probably about a year and a half when we did the Morbid Angel podcast and we were talking about Sandoval, and we said that Sandoval was so out of control with his drumming that it takes someone like a Trey who is also out of control in his guitar, and they almost are fighting each other for control of the band, and then you need that Dave Vincent or I forget his name, Steve Tucker,
Pickle, and Earache Rutan as well.
People like that in the middle to counterbalance these two super strong personalities. And so that's why he doesn't necessarily dominate Morbid Angel, because you have Trey on the other side, and here there's no Trey. It's the Pete Sandoval show.
Stoner against
what we've got on the docket coming up, we're gonna slow things down a little bit.
For a song.
So get your old lady out and slow dance. No, it's just a slow intro, and it's a much more metallic song, especially coming out of the punkier stuff that you hear after Fear of Napalm. And it's kind of the metallic. It's got more of a death metal vibe, at least until the end, when kind of the infamous Napalm Death groove kind of kicks in, and you hear the Napalm Death groove sort of weave its way in and out of different songs here. Kind of the Scum approach, if you will. And like you said, a song like Resurrection really is almost predictive of where Napalm's going to go with, say, Harmony Corruption and some of the records like that. So And then we've got Enslaved by Propaganda coming up, which is one of my favorite song titles. I mean, you can't say... I mean, what can you say about the subject matter?
You don't even need lyrics after that.
No, I mean, you just, this is Enslaved by Propaganda, and you can burp the rest of the song, and, like, you know that...
You obituary it up. Party it up.
You are enslaved by propaganda, in fact. And the drums in particular here, this is one of the highlights, I'd say. Very tank-like, surgical in a way, in terms of how they kind of tear you apart. Need to Live and Rip to Shreds. What were you hearing? And we were listening to Rip to Shreds just a moment ago. That was the more like...
we've got... I mean, the last couple tracks here, Need to Live and Rip to Shreds, have more of that... for lack of a better word, that, the possessed repulsion kind of more death metal, old school, before it was even called death metal,
Sure. It's more, they're more sinister songs, whereas, like...
It's, they're like amped up Venom riffs or something.
Yeah, for sure. And Rip to Shreds, cool thing about this is that's the anti-fast food, anti-animal cruelty, kind of like Carcass,
or like most Disrupt songs.
Yeah, exactly. And so, again, politically astute, I mean, this is what you were saying really earlier, is that real punk really became some of this stuff. I mean, in terms of thematic elements that punk was addressing in the late 70s and early 80s, it didn't carry over with the Offsprings and the Green Days and these other bands of the early 90s.
Well, you'll make some people I know cry calling that punk, but...
Well, I'm not, but I'm saying in terms of what people associate with punk, I mean, even like just the epitaph scene in general wasn't really addressing animal cruelty and wasn't addressing
any
nuclear
political
weapons,
stuff at all.
Enslaved by propaganda, things like that. I
mean, because this is almost like, go back and listen to the Requiem Punk show I did a couple weeks ago, or about a month ago by the time you hear this, I think.
Yeah.
And, the Reagan's the common thread through this, and it's, this is all, governments out to get you, and don't kill animals.
Yeah.
Like, or, look at
the Cold War, we're going to blow each other up with nuclear weapons, some of that kind of stuff. Yeah,
how basically, like, what's done to animals in order to service us to have, this fast food that... unfortunately
we can attest to the power of Wendy's.
Oof. I got ripped to shreds earlier from Wendy's, I think.
Delicious. I'm sure all the listeners want to know that.
Yeah.
But, so I think it's interesting, and I don't know, when you were talking with people who are more on the punk side when you were out on your trip in California and stuff, would they agree with you that grind and even to some extent or some forms of death metal was actually carrying the torch for what the real like punk attitude was?
Yeah, I mean, because basically the difference we have musically is vocals, but not even that much. I mean, look at some of the stuff we played on the show, and there's some pretty
harsh stuff.
Yeah, and double bass. That's usually something that wasn't, in punk. But as far as even to some degree, the image of the jeans and t-shirt punks, the guys had longer hair, but whatever. But as far as content and riffing, it's almost indistinguishable.
I guess what's always fascinating me, and again, I was so young in the 80s, I only kind of get kind of whiffs of stereotypes of this, is just how much punks and metalheads didn't get along in this era.
Yeah, that was the whole punk episode is about us, bridging the gap and, hugging and making up.
Yeah, well, that's peaceful.
Like we're basically the same dudes in different outfits.
Yeah, it's just so bizarre to me still, like to know why.
And I think seeing it so close with what happened with like early Peaceville and Earache, where he had this whole anarcho-punk thing and, crust, and then all this stuff kind of like coming to a head, like it gets more extreme. What the hell do we call it? Well, this is grindcore, this is whatever.
Sure.
But they're totally birthed out of the same scene.
And maybe, I don't know if there was sort of if the punk crowd was just like felt like they were losing their band because their bands were sort of moving on beyond them in terms of their sounds, and like kind of developing a heavier aesthetic or just getting more extreme.
It's kind of the same thing with the other metal that was out at the time. I mean, look at Venom and like say Misfits, and then what happens when you put Terrorizer in front of that? Like, where does it really come from? Does anybody know?
Yeah, that's true. So I don't know if it was just like they were unhappy because, like I said, the bands were moving forward quicker than the fans were ready to go with them. It was sort of imploding.
On the whole scenester thing now, I don't know how much that matters when you see I mean, kids seem today like they're into whatever.
Yeah, it's very.
There's a blurring of lines for all this stuff. So
it's very homogenous, which I like in some ways.
I like to some degree, but then a lot of it doesn't seem like they even care outside of, novelty factor.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I don't know. Not everybody's that way, but
yeah. So enjoy Resurrection, Enslaved by Propaganda, Need to Live, and then of course the aforementioned Ripped to Shreds from Terrorizer's World Downfall.
Your
just heard, Ripped to Shreds.
Need to Live.
Enslaved by Propaganda.
And Resurrection.
Nice little set there.
Yes. And hopefully you're starting to kind of see the makeup of this record, that in some ways the beauty of it is how similar each song is, but yet, I mean, it's kind of like Rain and Blood in a way, where like the first time you blaze through Rain and Blood, like it sounds very samey, but then you start to like be able to pick apart these different like little nuggets of joy, these moments that
special moments.
Yeah, these special moments, and you'll definitely hear them in the next set coming up here. The last set I'd say was fairly diverse, because it started with like a slow song, then end it with like kind of their most death metal song. This kind of goes back to what they're good at, which is pure energy, especially in these first two tunes, Injustice and Whirlwind Struggle. I think Whirlwind Struggle should tell you a lot about what the song's gonna sound like. I mean, it's just. The theme is slaves of the government and such, but it's kind of an atypical Terrorizer tune. Injustice, I love how this song starts off. I mean, it's like a minute and 17 seconds. No, a minute and 28 seconds.
Yeah,
and it's just goes right for the gut. It might be the most Fear Napalm on like caffeine.
It's like sped up.
Yeah, I mean that's crazy. Because Fear Napalm's fast enough, but. So it's good, and it kind of ends with a kind of a napalm sort of feel, It's weird for an American, because there's really an American sensibility to this music, even though we keep saying like it fits in with Napalm, or it fits in with what, say, Carcass did. I mean, and Repulsion's nowhere. I mean, they're Flint, Michigan. They're nowhere near the California scene. So again, who they're pulling their influences from, whether it's Napalm or even Morbid Angel to some extent.
Well, it all comes back to jazz and blues, which comes from America.
There you go.
See?
Beautiful. Gotcha. I don't know how you pulled that one.
Go get your Robert Johnson box set and you'll figure it all out.
You'll get it. And then we got a Crust tune coming up after that, Infestation. Just about conformity, standing up for your rights, all that kind of good stuff. So
they never really get into the specifics with what they're complaining about. It's broad generalizations of societal problems.
Yeah, I mean, I guess Fear Napalm and let's see, Ripped to Shreds about animal cruelty. Those get like more specific, but a lot of these, they're just
it's blanket. The
like,
government's trying to screw you, just a number.
I mean, I'm upset about stuff. And the cover, we should say too. I mean, you said it looked like kind of like a Jeff Walker.
It looks like one of his collages, but it also looks like Mid, who did a bunch of Napalm. I think they did the Harmony Corruption, Mass Appeal Madness, those kind of covers. But
it's got everything in there.
Now we got Jesus. We got some bobbies. Yeah, we got some war people.
Yeah, looks like some possibly some Muslim terrorists, some British police. People protesting, burning stuff. Are they burning a flag up there?
It looks like, burning U.S. flag with masks on. We got some, I don't know, it looks like some dead people and some kind of nuclear problem.
So apparently this is what's going to lead to the world downfall. So, Terrorizer, ahead of their time.
No McDonald's golden arches on here. I'm kind of disappointed.
Yeah, that is,
You get enough of those on your Disrupt albums.
That's true. And then we're going to end this set with Dead Shall Rise, the penultimate song on the record, and just totally catchy. I mean, it's really one of the most headbang-worthy songs, I think, on the whole record.
That's another one that has
This is the later Napalm. Right?
What's that?
This is the later Napalm.
Yeah, and Sandoval's, his swinging hi-hats.
Yeah.
It's funny how much you can, you listen to this record 3-4 times through, and just the drums keep popping out.
Sure.
I mean, that's definitely the high point of the record.
Yeah, and this is building towards the final tune, the title track, which we'll end the show with, and when we come back and talk about, and that's got probably maybe my favorite drumming on the whole record. Mm-hmm. It really is centered around it, and it's appropriate that they would kind of end that way. And you mentioned it's kind of interesting, that Sandoval didn't become the American sort of drum for hire, way that like a Gene Hoglan did. Or Hellhammer
maybe it's
did
his. We know he has a interesting personality.
Yeah, he's kind of just a kind of. I don't want to say
he's incredibly
simply and focused. Yeah, he's simple and focused in a way.
It's a Zen-like approach to drums.
Yeah, so I don't think he was really thinking about career mindedness or how can I make extra money and. Yeah.
You go into his apartment, it's probably like a little bedroll and just a drum set. That's how I like to think of it, at least.
And probably like a Nintendo or something like that.
I don't think he has the time for that.
That's true. He's got to practice.
Trey's got to read his
Tony Robbins
books and watch his manga and plays video games. But
although, if anybody's heard some news on what the heck's going on with this new Morbid Angel record, we were just checking their website because we're upset.
It's 03 since the last record.
Well, and
and we've had these tours with Vincent back.
Yeah, I mean,
and I don't care if you make another record. I want to see you guys play.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, we don't need like a turd, like a rink nose dissection kind of thing.
No, and after the fact.
Yeah, so just I don't know. If you know what's going on with Morbid Angel, shoot us an email. We're kind of curious to know. So, anyways, we've got 4 tunes here, and then we're kind of nearing the end of the show coming up here. So, enjoy Injustice, Whirlwind, Struggle, Infestation, and The Dead Shall Rise. Well, Mark, we've come to that point.
Come to an end.
Yeah.
The dead shall rise. There should be an infestation followed by a whirlwind struggle, and we'll always look forward to injustice in the world.
Well, clearly, if you saw Land of the Dead, you know that even in the zombie infestation, there are injustices even against the zombies.
Totally.
And Dennis Hopper's apparently involved. John Leguizamo. So, whatever John Leguizamo's involved, crap gets out of hand.
Buddy Kevin Cross, who was host of the Punk Show, one of his skateboard designs shows up in that movie.
No, that's pretty cool.
Keep an eye out for it. We'll give you a prize if he's fine.
Wow.
Just tell me the
how would
code.
they know?
It's probably the only skateboard that's shown in the movie.
Oh, okay.
But you can clearly see the bottom with his design on it. See?
You heard it first. But let us know what you think. If you're new to Terrorizer, because again, this is a record that if you're kind of a younger metalhead, I would say like people, 22, 23 and younger, there's a very good. I mean, they might not have ever heard Terrorizer.
A lot of people think you're talking about the magazine.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But World Downfall, I mean, this took me a long time before I was able to hear it.
Yeah.
Just like Repulsion, I mean, like I had kind of heard of Repulsion, but I never really got after Horrified until really about, when Relapse reissued those a couple of years back, 5, 6, 7,
2000.
8, 9, 10 years ago. Yeah, it feels like a few years. Yeah. Back when I was working at the record store. I know, I can't believe it. 7 years. It's crazy. Been teaching. But, we're going to wrap things up here tonight, and so, shoot us an email, requiempodcast@gmail.com, or leave a comment on iTunes for us, or find us on Facebook.
Or leave us a comment at requiempodcast.com. Also, if you'd like to help us out with our, the costs and the research, I mean, it's expensive to get these interns to come and do all this work for us.
Sure, yeah.
So,
obviously extensive research, as I'm sure you can tell from our
sometimes more than others. Sometimes we're learning with you.
Yeah, and I did double check on the Altars of Madness, and Scott Burns didn't produce that record.
So I think this is the first thing that led to his death metal sound.
Yeah, it was one.
But he engineered it. This wasn't his first production credit.
He may have done Obituary, though. I didn't check on Obituary. He may have done Slowly Rot. So I don't know.
Possibly.
Yeah.
That's something for you guys to yell at us about.
Yeah, you can get on us about that.
requiempodcast@gmail.com. So. But until then, we're going to roll out with World Downfall.
And this is an appropriate one. As I said before, this is the sort of drum orgy. It's just awesome. I could listen to the loop of like the weird but he does this weird like swing beat that like he could do it for 10 minutes. I'd eat it for breakfast every morning. So it's got a pretty sweet. You'll know it's right when the sort of scum breakdown kind of happens, the Celtic Frost kind of traditional breakdown, and then kind of Sandoval takes over the song and just
as he does the whole record
glides along. So for Terrorizer's World Downfall and Requiem podcast, I am Jason
and I am Mark.
Life lands into the climate that I'm waiting for me. Inside, inside, inside,